Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions, and this time we have a new trope talk. This one on secret identities, which usually really only applies to, at least I'm assuming Red is likely only going to talk about this in regards to comics, like Superman and Clark Kent, Peter Parker and Spider-Man, Batman, Bruce Wayne, etc., etc. It's essentially the superhero trope. If a character is a superhero, they have a secret identity. Well, if they exist in a comic book, they have a secret identity, it feels like, as someone that doesn't read comic books. But also this does apply to, Sauron. Um, uh, when he was Anatar, I believe was his elven name, or the elven name he used to disguise himself and trick people and whatnot. Right? He had secret identities. Um, who else? Who's another big one? I'm sure George R. R. Martin's got some secret identities that have yet to be revealed within A Song of Ice and Fire, and I mean we've got Fagon. Though that's the character of Aegon Targaryen, whether or not he truly is Aegon Targaryen or not, is his true identity or not. The general consensus by the audience here is that Aegon Targaryen is a fake identity, and his true self is likely either he's the child of the female line of succession of the Blackfires. Um, that's the most popular one. But he could also be a Rhaegar's true born, I guess, maybe, though I don't feel like that really fits George's storytelling, you know. But of course, then John Connington has his own secret identity. So there are secret identities that are known in A Song of Ice and Fire. I have tried to do this trope a couple of times so far, and I have not yet been satisfied with it. But I am trying. I'm going to make an attempt at a secret identity in my current work, in the current novel that I am writing. We'll see whether or not I stick with it, and if I'm satisfied with it, and then in the edits, change my mind and just not make it a secret identity. I keep fighting myself back and forth over what would be most narratively satisfying in regards to like the themes and such of the story itself and the wider world that I have built. But yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and dive into what Red is going to talk about with secret identities, and I'll see if I have much to chime in with.
You know, when I first joined the internet a little over a decade ago, there was a lot of common knowledge about internet safety that got.
You joined the internet that late? I was on the internet. I joined it probably a little too young. I think I was there in the early days of YouTube. I don't think I was quite there in '06, when it was like really just starting. I think I was there. I think I started really watching YouTube around the Google takeover. I think when Google bought it was when I started watching. Um, Definitely has led to a lot of brain rot.
Drilled into my head. People online are not your friends, you don't know everything about them, and above everything
Yeah. Yeah.
else, do not use your real legal name to identify yourself.
Oops, my channel name.
It kinda had dealing with the Fae energy. Guard yourself carefully lest ye be stolen away by a stranger of danger. But then, somewhere along the line, some people with too much money figured out they could get more money if they had everybody's real legal name, so they could link it forever with their internet search and purchase history to make advertising so much easier. And suddenly, websites just really wanted to see your legal ID before they let you in for security reasons or something. And they'd just get so confused if you tried to slot something into their first name last name boxes that didn't look like your first and last name. And it became common widespread praxis to just broadcast your private identity to anyone who wanted to see it, with the absolute depth of the self-imposed panopticon being the
It is, now that she's pointing it out, it is a really weird transitional period to actively think about. Because this was a thing, right? Like, yeah, early 2000s, mid 2000s, into the early 2010s. The popular thing was to not go by your name. And I mean, you see this reflected in a lot of the old school YouTubers Like PewDiePie, right? You think of him as PewDiePie, and he I don't know if that's a good example, but like I'm willing to bet so many of the old OG YouTubers created their title, their usernames because they were of the age, the period where you don't put your real name, your legal name as your internet identity, right? You keep the things separate. But then I think that really started to shift with the rise of social media. I want to say that really started. I don't want to say it started necessarily with Facebook, but I would say it probably started with the rise of Instagram around 2014. I think is when Instagram really took off. Because at least that's when I like joined it, and I only joined it because some girl I was really into at the time told me to, so I did. But then I started actually using it a good bit back then for memes and dumb videos and stuff. But nowadays I just use TikTok for the dumb videos. I don't really use Instagram like much at all. But except for to check in on some friends who, or keep up with some friends who I don't have like phone numbers of or access to them in my week to week. But anyways, yeah, damn, it's really weird to think about that transitional period now. I am now hyper aware because yeah, like my first YouTube channel, it was kind of that in between of my name, but also a secret identity. Like it did not at all reveal my last name. It was just kind of my first name, but you know that still provided a bit of anonymity. But yeah, huh? That was me. Ooh,
This idea that it was
think I might have an
actively
existential
suspicious
crisis
to
now.
not be doing that. After all, why would anybody want to not give 5 billion strangers on the internet a virtual house tour? That's the real suspicious
Yeah.
behavior, if you ask me. Your privacy is a personal attack on my freedom to know everything about you, and more importantly, on a corporation's freedom to sell your advertising profile for money. No shade to any of my peers who do this, but there is something a little bit dystopian about how the longest running wave of popular online sponsorships is centered on selling back the concept of privacy through VPNs and services you can pay to get your info removed from data brokers. I remember.
Here's my thing about that. I don't think those things work. I don't believe that they actually keep your information secure. I I don't believe like the government pays a lot of money to have the best hackers and best access to information. And the same goes for Facebook as a multi-billion-dollar corporation. None of the VPNs are billion-dollar corporations, I don't think. As far as I'm aware. They might be multi-million. They might even be in the hundreds of millions, but they are not. That still does not come close to a billion-dollar corporation and what it can afford to pay in terms of, you know, how it runs its site. So like I just call me doom and gloom perhaps, but I just don't think there's any avoiding the government getting. If the government wants your information, VPN, there's nothing that's going to stop them from getting it in regards to how the internet is inherently designed in our day and age.
When this was an unthinkable level of internet unsafety. And we got here so fast because somebody figured out they could make money off of it, and now here we are. And
Yay,
the cynical part of me,
capitalism.
which, contrary to popular belief, is not actually all of me, wonders if this rapid cultural shift is why, in roughly the same time frame, we've seen a significant downturn in the popularity of the concept of a secret identity. The secret identity trope is baked into the very foundations of the superhero genre. Back in the Zorro and Scarlet Pimpernel days, where the heroes were normal human
Scarlet Pimpernel's a good
vigilantes
movie.
operating
I
outside the
enjoyed it.
law in defiance of an unjust and powerful.
I think the Scarlet Pimpernel has Ian McKellen in it. I think. I watched it in AP European History, I think. Or did I watch it in AP World History Honors? Can't remember. It was either my freshman or sophomore year of high school.
Powerful government that, if they knew who they were, could easily thwart all of their do-gooding by just burning their house down. These mysterious masked men needed the mystery in the masks to cover their sneaky shenanigans, and this meant it was an absolutely top priority that their civilian identity be as far removed as possible from their vigilante identity. Thus, the prototypical secret identity trope took form. A character maintains two identities, one a seemingly normal person with a normal life and hobbies, and the other a larger-than-life character who gets up to hijinks that the secret identity could never be seen accomplishing. This was a very elegant formula for heroism with baked-in tension. Not only was our protagonist at risk in their heroic identity of getting their ass kicked, they were also at risk of being unmasked and exposed, damaging or even destroying their civilian life and everyone associated with it. Or their separate identities could come into conflict with one another, like for instance a character their secret identity was friends with might end up in opposition to their heroic alter ego. And in general, the tension of having to maintain a secret life away from the character's loved ones is a recipe for potentially endless volumes of drama. Now, this was not the only way for a hero to fly under the radar. Famous archetypical proto-superheroes like Robin Hood historically didn't have secret identities until relatively recent adaptations borrowed them back from the superhero genre he inadvertently contributed to. Robin Hood's main MO was literally just physically hiding, with his merry men holed up in some dark corner of the forest where the authorities couldn't find him. But the secret identity trope provided a much more elegant way for the heroes to maintain their nightlife and a day job at the same time, so instead of camping in the woods, they could be in a house and stuff. Interestingly enough, before the proto-superheroes, the secret identity mostly showed up in villainous contexts, or at least generally unfriendly ones. A major running theme through the Count of Monte Cristo is that mild-mannered Edmond Dantes adopts the persona of the mysterious Count of Monte Cristo to obscure the fact that he A. did not die in prison, and B. spent those long years in prison plotting an intricate revenge scheme against the people who put him in prison in the first place. While playing the Count, Edmond also takes on a handful of other disguises to properly array the chessboard as necessary.
Really need to read The Count of Monte Cristo. I really do. I feel like when I've heard about the book talked about, it just seems like a book that would be up my alley, sort of thing. But I just still haven't. I'm actually going to be reading the Canterbury Tales somewhat soon, in the coming months. I don't know, it's not going to be the next book I read, because I'm close to finishing Dune right now as of recording this. I don't think I'm going to read the Canterbury Tales after finishing the chonky book that is Dune, and kind of the denseness that is Dune. I don't want to go into a, Middle English, a book translated from Middle English, kind of poem story sort of thing. I feel like that would be, my brain would get fried. I don't know what I'm gonna read after I finish Dune here, but I need to add Count of Monte Cristo to my TBR list. I need to bump it up and whatnot. I want to try and read more of the classics. I've been very bad about reading the classics, because I do love the writing style of the classics, the way the words flow together. Particularly like Tolkien's writing style is a writing style that I really love and try and emulate in some ways, while also putting on a modern flair. I don't know if I'm good at it or not, but I try. But yeah. Anyways, that was a side tangent.
It's not quite the same as later secret identity stories. The Count doesn't end a long day of scheming by peeling off his goatee and saying, "Little does Madame Danglars suspect that the glamorous Count of Monte Cristo is secretly mild-mannered Edmond Dantes off to his day job at the Journal des Débats." But it definitely fits the same general shape. A more traditional early secret identity is in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, since through the magic of chemistry, mild-mannered Dr. Jekyll gets to indulge his worst impulses in the form of the unrecognizable Mr. Hyde, free of the consequences of his actions until it all catches up with him and bites him in the ass, of course. But after the Scarlet Pimpernel in 1905 and Zorro in 1919, the concept of a secret identity—
Damn, the Scarlet Pimpernel is that old of a book? Okay, well, actually, no, it's that young? I thought it was an 1800s book, not a early 1900s.
was pretty solid.
Secret identity. A character maintains a civilian identity as an unimpressive, boring, normal person to obscure their secret life as a super cool badass, or some other vibe best kept hidden. It's rare for this to be secret to everyone, and usually there are one or two allies who know their secret dual life. The threat of exposure hangs over them.
Linked with heroism, allowing a good person to do good deeds that they'd otherwise be prevented from doing without significantly more difficulty. And that loose notion of incognito heroism carried over to Superman's debut in 1938, kicking off the superhero.
I always forget just how, like, I don't know, the concept of Superman is it feels so modern, but then you remember when it was made, and it's just like, it's also so old now. but still so modern.
genre boom, and Superman is a weird case, so we'll get back to him. The
He
much
is?
simpler example from around the same time would be Batman, explicitly inspired by Zorro and correspondingly borrowing his gimmick of posing as a rich idiot with no day job and spending his nights do-gooding in a mask and cape. Batman's version of the secret identity was significantly more cloak and dagger than Superman, with a secret base in his mansion and a loyal butler in on the scheme. Even
Y'all ever, when does Batman sleep? Is that something that's ever addressed? Does Batman sleep? Does he know how?
a kid's sidekick sharing the same gimmick.
It's like if he's fighting crime at night, how can he, then go about his day job, his day identity? He's got to make appearances as the rich man, as the playboy.
From this point forward, almost every major superhero got a secret identity from day one, including slightly surprising cases like Thor, whose introduction in comics involved him losing all his powers and his memory of being Thor, with Odin turning him into the mild-mannered and physically disabled Donald Blake, who, as far as he knew, was just a normal guy. He then spent 10 years as Donald Blake before rediscovering his hammer and his powers, with the whole thing intended as a lesson to make Thor a little more humble by forcing him to see the world from the perspective of someone who wasn't an unstoppable god of thunder. This concept has been dropped in basically all recent adaptations, which find it much easier to just let Thor be Thor 24/7. And there's that slight hint of weirdness again, isn't there?
Well, I would say they drop that in the case of, if they want to characterize Thor, they will do that for Thor. They will have him go through that moment of losing his powers, right? We see that in, what year did the first Thor movie release? Was that 2010, 2011? Because I think it came out before the Avengers movie. The first Avengers movie. And I enjoyed that movie. I think I enjoyed it more than most people probably enjoyed Thor 1. Out of the four Thor movies, that's probably the second best one. First one, of course, is Ragnarok. But, right, I mean, we even see that in Ragnarok, where recharacterizing Thor, they strip away his abilities again, and it works because that's kind of the thing about Thor that makes him kind of an interesting character. We see that duality inside of him wrestling with oh, I'm so used to that's his trope. That's the Thor trope, I would say. I have only known life as the superhero thing or whatever, right? And now it's gone. At least in the terms of the modern adaptations. Obviously, in that original version, he was not aware that he was a god beforehand, but yeah.
It's that same thing we smelled with Superman. There's this question looming over the secret identity trope when it gets applied to superheroes. Why does an explicitly super powerful entity need a secret identity to protect them? This is not an unanswerable question, but it does beg an answer. Back in the 40s, when superheroes were popping out of the woodwork, everyone got a secret identity by default, but that's not the de facto status quo anymore. Ever since the MCU wrapped up its first movie with I Am Iron Man, it's been the hip, trendy thing to make sure modern superheroes go maskless as much as possible, both to give the actors that precious expensive face time and to theoretically replicate the runaway success of Iron Man by doing everything in it that worked the first time as many times as possible. In the current zeitgeist, it's almost a 50-50 shot if a character who's
Yeah, oh, it really, I'm so curious, I am both curious and uninterested in where the MCU is going, how they are going to deal with that, because they've essentially, with that, set themselves up against what tends to work really well for superheroes, and it's kind of why Spider-Man works so well, and why I think Spider-Man also works really well in the MCU is his struggle with the duality of being a part of the MCU's Avengers, but also him wanting to maintain his secret identity. I mean, that being the essential struggle, for Peter Parker in No Way Home was so good. Now, of course, the execution of how Peter Parker deals with the problem, right, is questionable. It wasn't perhaps the best solution, but in the moment, I will say I really enjoyed No Way Home in the moment. Of course, separating myself now over a year 2 years since the movie came out. Um, it doesn't sit. It has more of a sour taste to me just because of the longer form, long term implications that it brings up, and problems, in terms of how they want to tackle things in the future or whatever, right? But in terms of the short term, that immediate thing, but also I do find that that struggle that Peter Parker had in that moment was just so good. Like, I don't like,
bread and butter is
I don't know
vigilante
what kind of
justice will bother with
point I'm
maintaining
trying to make
secrecy
there,
at
but
all.
yeah.
And so the question comes up a lot more frequently. Does this character, who's traditionally had a secret identity, really need one? What purpose does it serve in the narrative? Is it needlessly confusing, or just the right amount of confusing? Now, there are some character factors that play into whether or not a secret identity really makes sense. Unpowered or low-powered heroes like Batman don't need to justify maintaining a secret identity because it feels like a completely logical way to keep the Batman Project funded while staying out of jail. And there's the secondary element that Batman's entire MO is built around creating an aura of unstoppable fear around the Batman identity, a fear that would be
still need to
dramatically
watch
reduced if he were
this
revealed to
Batman
just be a
movie.
rich kid with issues. One of the cool things about secret identities is that there are generic reasons to have them: protect loved ones, stay out of jail, but there can also be highly character-specific reasons to maintain them. But in the case of many other superheroes, maintaining a secret identity feels strange or unnecessary. Recent adaptations of Thor usually just let him hang out on Asgard or in the Avengers Tower when he isn't out being Thor. He has no need of a day job and isn't particularly hurting in lessons for humility, so he's just Thor all the time. Wonder Woman is another character whose secret identity has kind of been deprecated over time. When she debuted in 1942, she maintained a civilian identity that she borrowed from somebody else, and she used it to work as a secretary in the army. But that kind of gradually fell by the wayside, and by the time Crisis on Infinite Earths rebooted the continuity, they basically dropped her secret identity altogether. With the caveat, the comic book continuity is a snake pit, and that's as far in as I'm going. The Justice League cartoon didn't make her use a secret identity at all. In fact, Justice League is an interesting case study because of the main 7 characters, Superman, Batman, Martian Manhunter, The Flash, Wonder Woman, Hawkgirl, and Green Lantern. Only 3 of them use their traditional secret identities, those being Superman, Batman, and The Flash. Martian Manhunter usually has a secret identity as extremely normal human detective John Jones, but this incarnation of the character had basically been locked up in a government facility since he landed on Earth, and then immediately joined the Justice League, so he didn't have time or inclination to make a civilian identity. Wonder Woman doesn't seem to see the point. This version of Hawkgirl has huge feathery wings growing out of her back, so passing as a normal human is kind of out of the question, and Green Lantern probably could do the secret identity thing, but as a former Marine and current space cop, he would probably consider it unethical to conceal his identity, and his comic counterpart hasn't worn a mask since 1985, so that one's pretty understandable. That's a less than 50%
Why was his skin yellowish green?
retention rate for secret identities in just one show. So it's pretty clear that as the characters get adapted and their circumstances change, sometimes their reasons for needing a secret identity stop applying. Thor and Wonder Woman are both physical gods, and their characters work just fine with or without them needing to pretend to be ordinary people when they're paying rent. Sometimes characters with more modest living situations and normal day jobs, like The Flash, maintain their secret identities seemingly just so they can avoid the hassle that would come with being in superhero customer service mode 24/7. But a lot of characters, high power and otherwise, have just gradually lost the secret identity thing over time. But Superman is a bulletproof flying tank who can hear someone talking on the other side of the planet and fly there before they finish the sentence. Why on God's green earth does Superman need to be Clark Kent? And Superman is a very interesting example, because he doesn't need to be Clark Kent. He is Clark Kent, raised in all-American Kansas.
That's why I didn't want to say anything there, because I trusted Red to say exactly what I was thinking, and yep, she's gonna hit it right on the mark.
Boy with his alien heritage and superpowers kind of creeping up on him as he grew up. Superman is a job he does, but it's not who he is. Adaptations like My Adventures with Superman build on this and highlight how terrifying it would be to undergo a transformation you don't understand and suddenly realize you don't work the same way as anyone else. That version of Clark hides his powers even from his most trusted loved ones because he is terrified that they'll think of him as a monster and he'll lose his friends. That is not the kind of problem that an excess of superpowers can automatically solve. Part of what makes Superman so interesting is he doesn't want to be an isolated physical god bunking down in his fortress of solitude. He wants friends and family and a normal life, and he could not have those things if everybody knew he could shoot lasers out of his eyeballs. And that's not his fault, it's the fault of how he'd be perceived. He doesn't want to be seen as a monster or a god, and that means he has to pretend to be a human. This is a pretty popular way to answer the secret identity question. Superhero
It's why probably, like, going back to what I was talking about earlier in regards to Superman's, like, how he both is super old but also still manages to feel so modern. It's because, like, that, probably because of this point here, is he has really largely stayed unchanged over these 70 plus years. But also that, like, um, his desire for why he wants to keep Superman separate from Clark Kent is like a belief that I feel like a lot of people, like, a very, for someone who technically isn't human, a human, like, desire, right? There are so many people, right? One of the things that you hear about, like, especially when people talk about fame, is so many people want the benefits of fame, but they don't want the negative side effects of it. And Superman is kind of doing that. He is straddling that line there of, when he's Superman, he's got the fame, but then, right, then he can switch that off. And when he's Clark Kent, he's just a normal, regular guy. So I think that's something that a lot of people can just immediately identify with.
Heroes are people too, and they want to be able to clock out and worry about normal people things sometimes. But it's not like having a secret identity automatically removes all the problems of a high-flying superhero lifestyle. As the superhero genre grew, secret identity drama became a popular staple of it, a secondary bit of drama to layer on for spice when the characters weren't just socking villains of the week on the jaw. Maintaining a secret identity left a superhero vulnerable to the dreaded high-stakes peril of interpersonal issues. A character in their secret identity would be unable to explain why they had flaked out on a social engagement, or why they always seem to disappear when things get scary, leading their friends and loved ones to frequently conclude that they're a coward or other similar unpleasantness. Sometimes, frequently even, a character in their secret identity will be pining after a love interest who only has eyes for their superhero identity, and revealing the truth to them would risk blowing their secret wide open. Characters with secret identities are often very afraid of their friends and loved ones discovering their secret, or more worryingly, of their enemies finding out who their civilian identity is, usually because they have a pretty sizable supporting cast of characters who could very easily be put in serious danger if a bad guy figured them out. But the price of hiding that from them is having to lie to their closest friends, and frequently being seen in a pretty negative light as the consequences of their double life catch up with them. What this means is that a superhero's identity being revealed is a constant threat that the story can tease them with whenever things need to be spiced up. But at the same time, it's a bit of a nuclear option. A secret identity and a superhero's private civilian life are integral to the status quo, and if the unthinkable happens and their secret identity gets blown, sure, it's a big moment, but it foundationally changes the story from that point on. If a secret identity gets broadcast to the world, everything is going to change. Villains have shiny new targets to hostageify. Former friends of the secret identity with grudges against the hero identity might suddenly be grappling with feelings of crushing betrayal. Even when the current story resolves, the hero's downtime is no longer going to look like it did when they had a secret identity to relax in. They're going to be suffering all the worst effects of fame, with the added threat of a supervillain busting in and flattening the dining room. Now, of course, these threats only apply to certain kinds of characters. Again, physical gods like Thor and Wonder Woman aren't really subject to a lot of these considerations. All of Thor's loved ones are either gods in their own right or superheroes, or Jane Foster, who has at times been both of those things. Even big piles of money can suitably empower a superhero to insulate themselves from most of the nasty consequences, which is why Iron Man has canonically shed his secret identity in both the comics back in 2002 and, of course, the MCU back in 2008, with really only minimal negative consequences. But some characters are much more at risk from a secret identity reveal, and
Well, I don't know if you would say minimal consequences. Like Iron Man 2, doesn't that kind of open with his house getting hit by a missile?
the poster boy for that is probably Spider-Man, which brings us to another interesting complication to the superhero genre: its constant ongoing war with its own status quo. Stories and characters need to change to advance over time and avoid retreading old ground too much, but any long-form serialized story is going to struggle with how to change without losing the stuff the invested audience already likes. Spider-Man suffers from this big time, because that man has not been able to consistently escape high school since 1962, and the writers keep rolling back any success he has in his relationships to keep him single, miserable, and unsupported. This status quo treadmill phenomenon affects many characters and their secret identities, because frankly, a character's identity can only be revealed a limited number of times before it fundamentally changes the game, that limited number usually being 1. And Peter Parker has had this happen several times. Unlike Iron Man, Spider-Man has no money, and if he gets his identity blown, he has an elderly aunt, several love interests, and a school and or workplace full of friends that can very easily be threatened to get to him, and he can't exactly relocate them all to a high-security penthouse suite with 75 cents and a stick of gum. them. Because of this, the threat of his identity being revealed is constant and very severe, and there's only so many times he can go, haha, just kidding, before it stops sticking. Spider-Man's identity has been revealed several times in the comics, and while sometimes he has the cover that everyone thinks he's such a dweeb he's obviously just cosplaying Spider-Man, or they play the old switcheroony by having another friend turn up in costume so everyone can see they're obviously not the same guy, sometimes it sticks. This was even a critical part of the Civil War storyline, where as an inexplicable show of faith in the system of superhero registration, Peter Parker reveals his secret identity to the world, and then a few runs down the line, Aunt May gets shot because of it, Peter makes a deal with the actual devil to undo the entire thing, and the status quo rolls right back to where it was, only slightly worse, because Spider-Man cannot get out of a storyline without it punishing him in
what they did with No Way Home.
some way for existing. The secret identity reveal is such a nuclear option, it's almost on the level of threatening the end of the world as we know it. It's such a story breaker that it can almost never be fully committed to. But at the same time, small-scale reveals can be extremely impactful without really altering the status quo all that much, where the character reveals their secret, intentionally or otherwise, to a single friend or ally at a time. And these reveals basically come in two flavors: I had no idea, and I've known the whole time. The I had no idea reveal is typically how the hero
Character reveals their secret identity to an ally or friend who is blindsided by the sudden recalibration of their worldview. All those times you left the oven on? Yeah, I don't even own one microwave. I don't even own one microwave
in
oven.
question expects things to play out. They steal their nerves, reveal their greatest secret, field any and all follow-up questions, and impress upon their conversational partner how absolutely vital it is that they not reveal the truth to anyone. These reveals can be very emotionally fraught, and the person being told about the secret identity might be quite upset or distraught at learning their friend has had this whole other side to them that they never told them about before. The I've known the whole time reveal
The character is blindsided when their ally reveals they've been keeping their secret from them for them without them realizing at all. So that time I had Anne show up and my costume performer wasn't her, you seemed like you needed a win.
is, in my opinion, so much more fun. In this scenario, the secondary character either
Well, it depends on how this one's handled. I think this one can be handled really well. It is probably easier to handle really well because of just how you handle writing in general most of the time. You can have this one because it's a more satisfying one because it makes our superhero character, right? It lowers their superhero-ness a bit. It humanizes them a bit. Them like not realizing something like this that their friend knew the whole time, and then their friend realizing it ups the friend's characterization because it makes them like more intelligent, so to speak, in the eyes of like the audience. And also you can scatter in a little bit of hints here and there that our friend here is putting the pieces together, right?
either responds to their reveal or says unprompted that they have, in fact, known their secret for a hot minute, they've just kept it under wraps, preserving the hero's greatest secret without them even knowing they were protecting them. This reveal typically does a lot to strengthen the characterization of the secret keeper because this means they were A, smart enough to figure this out, B, compassionate enough to keep it hidden,
like I was saying.
and C, careful enough to succeed in keeping it hidden even while going through the typical trials and tribulations that come with being an important secondary character to a person who deals with supervillains on the regs. The character might even point out that the hero's disguise is paper thin, or that they've known each other for ages, or they can recognize their voice, or other typical plot hole dings that superhero secret identities get pinged with. Identity reveals are also a common way for superheroes to bond with each other. Characters with super senses can frequently just sniff out their allies even when they're out of uniform. Anyone who's telepathic has basically no excuse for not knowing who all their friends are, and anyone who's known Batman for more than 30 seconds can expect to be on the Wayne family newsletter mailing list by the end of the month. Not every hero needs a secret identity, but I can see why it was the default starting point for pretty much every superhero. If a character doesn't need a secret identity, they can just drop it and eat the consequences. But if a writer decides to give a formerly public-facing hero a secret identity, it's a much harder transition to pull off without full universe retcons. Secrets really only move one way, and you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. They're not always necessary, but I think a lot of characters benefit heavily from the extra layers of drama and intrigue that a secret identity provides. And I promise I'm not mad that the MCU took like 3 entire phases to even consider letting a character have an actual proper secret identity, and they had to do a one more day universe reset to do it. I'm not mad, I swear. Earth's Mightiest Heroes basically doesn't let anyone have a secret identity either, and they pull it off just fine. Frankly, I expected to be more butthurt about this, but honestly I think it's quite interesting that some heroes can just have their whole face hanging out and lose nothing in the characterization department, while for some some characters, having their mask even slightly askew is a potentially devastating threat. The superhero genre can seem like a bit of a monolith at times, but at its best, every character is navigating a completely unique set of challenges, a combination of their own abilities, their goals, and their socioeconomic position in the real world.
Yeah,
A
that's a lot
secret
of common
identity can be a
characters.
safe haven, a true self, a cunning disguise, a tactical asset. The concept is as varied as characterization itself, and to be honest, I was not expecting that when I sat down to write this out. It feels so generic, but I think that's just due to overexposure. When we look at the characters whose secret identities have made it through 80 years of rewrites and adaptation, we find almost as many reasons to preserve those identities as there are characters that have them. The good stuff sticks around. So, yeah?
If I had a nickel for every time Spider-Man had been unmasked in front of everyone, I have one less nickel than I was supposed to because Spider-Man made a deal with the devil and paid a terrible price. By 5 cents. And that was Trope Talk Secret Identities by Overly Sarcastic Productions. This was a really good video. I loved how the tackling of both what is strong about this trope, but also what can be a bit of a hindrance when writing this trope. And I think Red did a fantastic job both here. I hope you guys enjoyed as well. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.